Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. My name is Tyler Scribner, and I'm a policy analyst for the National Congress of American Indians. I'll be your co-moderator for this webinar series. My co-moderator for this series is James Colomb, Project Manager for the Center for Indian Country Development. On behalf of NCAI and CICD, we would like to thank you for attending the final installment of our four-part series on homeownership in Indian Country. This four-part webinar series covers the Tribal Leaders Handbook on Homeownership, a publication of the Center for Indian Country Development of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis and Enterprise Community Partners. Today we'll hear from Patrice Kunesh, Executive Director of Haha Consulting and former Director of the Center for Indian Country Development, followed by Susan Hammond, Executive Director of Four Directions Development Corporation. Then we'll hear from Susan Anderson, Director of the Rural and Native American Initiative at Enterprise Community Partners. After, James will discuss some transferable lessons and open up the webinar for Q&A. Finally, we'll provide you with a few brief announcements. Before we begin today's presentation, I'd like to go over some of our webinar features. First, you should see on your screen the PowerPoint for today's presentation. If during the presentation you experience any lag in slide transition, it may be a result of internet connections, so just give it a few extra seconds to update on your screen. Currently, with the exception of the panelists, all audience phone lines are muted until conclusion of the presentation. But if you'd like to queue up a question at any time during the presentation, you can type it into the questions box on your webinar control panel. After the presentation, we'll have a Q&A session, and panelists will answer questions submitted through the questions box. If you'd like to ask your question over the phone, please use the raise hand option so we can unmute your phone line after the presentation. Our webinar software archives all questions submitted through the questions box, so if we're unable to answer or address your question, we'll follow up with you after the webinar has concluded. And finally, this webinar is being recorded so that we can share this presentation with you and others. Now that we've covered some of the webinar features, I always find it a bit more personable to see who's behind the phone. As previously mentioned, your moderators are James and myself. I'm a policy analyst for the National Congress of American Indians and a proud citizen of the Chickasaw Nation. James is a project manager for the Center for Indian Country Development of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. NCAI is grateful to partner with CICD to produce this four-part webinar series and appreciates the critical role James has played in organization and production of this series. I would also like to take a moment to give a special thanks to the NCAI Partnership for Tribal Governance, Vice President Ian Record, as well as Climate Action Fellow Sadie Red Eagle. Thank you very much for your behind-the-scenes work on making this webinar such a great series for Indian Country. Our presenters for today's webinar are Patrice Kunesh and Susan Hammond. Patrice is the Executive Director of Haha Consulting and the former Director of the Center for Indian Country Development, the Federal Reserve System's only research and outreach center dedicated to Indian country issues. As the Director of CICD, Patrice helped to establish the National Native Homeownership Coalition in 2016, a working group of tribal housing programs, federal agencies, housing organizations, and lenders that desire to promote Native homeownership on trust land. In 2018, CICD partnered with Enterprise Community Partners to create the Tribal Leaders Handbook on Homeownership. Before joining the Center for Indian Country Development, Patrice held appointments as the Deputy Undersecretary for Rural Development at the U.S. Department of Agriculture and as the Deputy Solicitor for Indian Affairs at the United States Department of the Interior. Next, we'll hear from Susan Hammond. Susan is a citizen of the Penobscot Nation and Executive Director of Four Directions Development Corporation. As one of the founders, Ms. Hammond has been involved with the Four Directions Development Corporation since the earliest planning stages, beginning in fall of 2000. Prior to Four Directions, she worked for the Penobscot Tribe for 10 years in various positions and served on the Penobscot Nation Tribal Council from 1996 to 2004. Thank you, Susan and Patrice, for taking time to present as part of this webinar series. With that, I would like to turn it over to our first presenter, Patrice Kunesh.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really happy to be here with you all this afternoon. I started with the first webinar series, and it was really an introduction to housing and homeownership in Indian country. So it's fantastic that we get to talk about making this work and putting it to action with a conversation about affordable housing. So I thought we would talk about some big general concepts about what is affordability, what makes it affordable, and who's involved in the process. And then you can actually talk to the folks who make it work every day, like Susan Hammond and Susan Anderson. So when we think about Indian country, I think we need to really level set and appreciate that the production of affordable housing and the development of housing in general is fundamentally different than in other areas. And that's not surprising, but it's work that creates an abundance of well-being and social good. So it's an important conversation. I also want to encourage you to take a look at the Tribal Leaders Handbook on Homeownership, because we have a whole chapter devoted to making homeownership affordable and available. And that would be chapter 10 in the handbook, and it starts on page 107 if you're looking at it either online or in hand. And we go through some good terminology there. We talk about strategies, and then give an example of a really fantastic low-income housing tax credit project at Santo Domingo. So let's think about what makes housing affordable and looking at it through the lens of Indian country. And it's such a broad community that engaged in this work. Of course, we have the individual homeowners or renters, and this conversation spans both homeowners as well as folks who've been living in subsidized rental housing. The tribal governments, of course, are very integral to this process. And then, of course, lenders like native CDFIs, like Susan Hammond's Four Directions. Developers are integral as well, because they are actually the work on the ground. Project managers. And then we have to think about our nonprofit organizations, our philanthropic organizations like Enterprise, that are providing really critical resources and support to making this work. So when we think about the definition of what is affordable, the current standard is that a family should pay no more than 30% of its income on rent or on its mortgage, or for housing costs generally. And if it's more than 30%, we call that a housing burden, and it means that a family does not have funds for other things, such as education or transportation or food, the real basic necessities of life. So that's what we're trying to look at, is what is that sweet spot, and of course, what is the income to match that. In Indian country, is what we're seeing across the country, is that there's not enough housing on most American Indian reservations. There's just not enough housing affordable and available to folks who are renting, to folks who want to be homeowners, and folks who need a supportive housing environment. It could be our vets, our folks with disabilities, or co-housing situations. And some statistics that I was looking at recently is that for every 100 low-income households, there are only 29, or about 29, adequate, affordable, and available units. So when we think about rental units, we have to think about the cycle of who's in, who goes out, who moves through that economic spectrum, and then the availability of homes for sale at affordable rates. We know in Indian country that there's a very strong demand for housing, especially homeownership. But we have, as I said, very poor supply, and the housing market is pretty flat. Even with two-parent family incomes, we see families that must wait for years to find a safe, affordable place to live. And they may be forced to live away from the reservation community, which of course has really tremendous impacts for the reservation economies. So building housing is expensive, and we know that there's a huge gap between the building cost and maintaining housing generally within our Native communities. So oftentimes costs need to be subsidized, and we turn most frequently, or the most familiar subsidy or support is from the federal government. And they're supporting the construction, the preservation, and the operation of housing throughout Indian country. And it's not just as a subsidy as we think about it. It's a treaty right. It's a federal trust responsibility across Indian country. So we have to look at it, though, in terms of the industry standards, and we talk about it in terms of finding resources and subsidies. And so when we look at this affordable housing gap, we look at, so what is this formula that we need to achieve to find, to make housing development affordable? So developers, as I said, are sort of the linchpin to all of this. They rely on loans to fund planning and construction. And they get these loans if the project, on paper at least, produces income and revenue to pay back the loan. So we have to look at revenue and the debt, and then looking at the subsidy for that gap financing. And as we apply that sort of broad, basic formula to Indian country, we see that Indian housing has different costs and different aspects. So, for example, the acquisition costs. We have in most reservations communal land, tribal lands, that the tribal council, the governing body, the tribal housing authorities really need to designate for residential uses. And that's where our conversations around the Hearth Act, the residential leasing program around Hearth Act, is so very important. That designation then allows developers to really get literally the lay of the land, to look at infrastructure, utilities, road, sewer, and housing costs. And those construction costs obviously are going to have to factor in materials and labor. And hopefully in the tribal setting, it'll include a tribal workforce that can be built up and sustained in terms of long-term housing support. And then we have to look at the planning and the development fees, and that's when we bring in the skilled, experienced project managers and the designers that really make the housing fit the community needs. So then let's take a look at where to get financing to help build affordable housing. And the developer, as we said, has to balance the desire to build as many units as possible and the need to turn some profit, right? Or at least not lose money. One of the main sources of those funds is HUD, and HUD offers programs for developers and investors as incentives to build. As we said also, there's a federal trust responsibility, so we have a lot of federal programs run through HUD and its Indian housing program. So one of the starting points obviously is to contact HUD in the state you're located, inquire about, for example, the low income housing tax credit program. HUD's LIHTC, as we call it, provides these tax credits to states, which then in turn offer them to developers of eligible housing projects. And if you are really interested in taking a deeper dive in what projects have been funded, the Center for Indian Country Development has a research paper by economist Kenny Whaley, for example, who's really doing some good work in looking at where the housing is, what are the development needs, and he finds, for example, the Dakotas, Navajo Nation, North Carolina, and Oklahoma have been real drivers of these light tech projects. So developers really need to look at what tax credits are available, try to incentivize investors who will help fund the project. Securing the matching financing is really important. So another source is state housing finance authorities. These offer really nice pool of funds to supplement those federal funds I was talking about earlier. And then, of course, we need to work with housing advocates such as NeighborWorks America, Enterprise Community Partners that we have on the line. Our National American Indian Housing Council also is a fabulous source of information on housing financing. So to ensure that a project is eligible, again, it takes strong leadership. It takes a clear strategic goals and some concerted efforts in terms of planning. And that's where I think the Tribal Leaders Handbook is so important, and its application in Indian country. I think I'm going to leave it at that. I've got some more comments I can make about tax credits and grants, but I think it's really important to hear how this works and operates in the field. So I'll stop at that. Turning it back to you, Susan.
Okay. I'm wondering, Tyler, if you could advance to my slides.
Absolutely. We're just having a second to catch up with the lag time. Excuse that.
Great. Okay. Well, hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Again, I'm very happy to be here today and presenting on affordable housing and home ownership, certainly very key in the communities that we serve here in Maine. I am, as Tyler mentioned, Susan Hammond, the Executive Director of Four Directions Development Corporation, and we are a Native American nonprofit, CDFI, certified by the U.S. Department of Treasury, and also a licensed supervised lender here in the state of Maine where we are located. We look at affordable home ownership from a very holistic perspective here in the work that we do in Maine with our tribal four tribes. And so we look at, we take a multifaceted approach. We start out with the design and development of our loan products that will meet the specific and unique needs of our tribal citizens and tribes, as well as, and then once we stay connected with those tribal members and tribes that we have made loans to, and establish a very long-term relationship over the life of the loan with our borrowers. We often will know them personally, and that's what's unique about being a native CDFI. We're very, have a deep connection with the communities that we serve. And if the borrowers run into any difficulty over the life of the loan, run into challenges in their life, we try to address that with them because we really want people to stay in their home, and that's part of our mission. But we also have long-term relationships with our funders, letting them know what kind of loan capital is needed in Indian country to best address our unique needs and to make sure that it's affordable to those that we serve. And then lastly, it's imperative that we establish strong and solid lending policies and practices. So just a little bit of background about Four Directions. I just wanted to let you know that our longstanding mission is to improve the social and economic conditions of the four Native American tribes in Maine. And you can see the map there that we have four tribes throughout the state of Maine, and They are the Aroostook Band of Micmac in Presque Isle, Maine, which is in northern part of Maine, the Holton Band of Maliseets, and the two Passamaquoddy tribes. One is located at Indian Township, and the other at Pleasant Point, and then the Penobscot Nation. And our offices are located in Orono, Maine, which are about 10 minutes away from the Penobscot Nation. But to continue on with our mission is to improve the social and economic conditions of those 4 Native American tribes in Maine through education and investment in affordable housing, tribal business ventures, and Native entrepreneurship. So we've been around since 2001 and have been actually making loans since 2002, and started out right from the beginning making housing loans, home improvement loans, as well as mortgage lending. So since we've been lending back in 2002, 18 years now, we've made over almost $13 million in loans. 10 million of those are, approximately 10 million are mortgage loans. And then recently we began doing community development lending, and we've made about $2.5 million in community development loans. And as getting into a development realm, the development space, we've also worked very closely with the tribes in creating affordable homes, and to date, we've helped create 56 affordable homes in the Wabanaki communities. And being a native CDFI, we also have an educational component. We're a financing entity, but we're also an educational entity. And so we provide housing counseling and group education, and we have served approximately 234 families and almost 1,000 individuals in home ownership and counseling, as well as home ownership and group education. We offer a volunteer income tax, a free volunteer income tax clinics every year, and we have been able to help over 700 individuals, and also have helped them access over 400,000 earned income tax credits. We've established a circuit rider program to ensure that we're in the Native American programs on a monthly basis. As I mentioned, we're located in Orono, Maine, which is about 10 minutes north of Bangor, and the Penobscot Nation is only 10 minutes away, which makes it easy for us to serve those tribal members in their community. But the other reservations are at least 2 hours away from where we are located, and in the case of Presque Isle, with the Aroostook Band of Micmacs, they're 3 hours away. But we are committed to being in their community because we need to have a presence and to be there to meet one-on-one, face-to-face with those tribal members who are going through our counseling, our one-on-one counseling, and also going through our lending program as a borrower. So we have made that commitment. And then also one of our tasks, one of the services that we offer as a community development CDFI is housing needs assessments. And we recently did one for the Holton Band of Maliseets in assessing their homeownership needs and interest. And we had a pretty good success rate there, and we're actually participating in a homeownership initiative with the Holton Band of Maliseets. And what we discovered is the tribe wanted to assess what was the demand and interest in homeownership in their community, thinking that there was little interest, as well as very limited readiness of their membership. And currently they have no home ownership housing opportunities on their reservation. And through the assessment that we conducted, we did determine that there is a strong basis for home ownership in their community. So we're moving forward with that and hope to help them actually develop 12 to 15 home ownership homes in their community over the next couple of years. So that was exciting news for them as well as for us to help them. One project that I wanted to bring to your attention is a home ownership project that we collaborated with the Penobscot Indian Nation. And in that project, we worked with them in the creation of 12 home ownership homes, and there's a picture there on the slide of the homes. These were LEED gold certified homes and had some solar paneling, energy efficiency in terms of the insulation and lighting, and there were a number of factors that went into getting the gold certification through the LEED program, and we were really pleased to participate in that. And the total project cost for this homeownership project was approximately $3 million. And the construction financing, Four Directions participated in that with another local financial institution. And we participated in approximately almost $500,000 in the construction of that and provided gap financing for the local lender. But we also assisted in the mortgages. Once the homes were built, we, of those 12 homes, we financed 7 of the mortgages, the takeout financing for those homes through our mortgage loan program. These homes were cost on average, total cost for each home was around $200,000, but we were able to bring the home cost offered to the homeowner down to $120,000 through subsidy with some of our federal programs and the Penobscot Nation. And so just to go briefly over how this collaboration helped in the affordability of these 12 homes is the Penobscot Nation was very generous in providing a free lot assignment for each of these homes. So there was no land cost for the tribal member. We also work closely with BIA in terms of helping us with our infrastructure in terms of creating the necessary road system. IHS assisted in the water and sewer, and then the USDA assisted with the utility cost of this project. And then Four Directions came in and offered affordable housing loans to the tribal members. And we had a tiered system based upon the income of the individual. For those that were very low income, 50% median income, we were able to offer a 3% loan product. And those that were higher income, we tiered it based upon their risk rating. And it made it very affordable. And as Patrice mentioned, one of our loan policies dictate that the debt to income can be no more, the debt to income for the housing cost to their budget be no more than 30%. And so that's part of the policies and procedures that we put in place that ensure that these homes are affordable for our tribal members. I think the other piece that I wanted to speak about is the role of Native CDFIs and how they contribute to nation building. And it's a really critical role, and we're a vital tool in this whole process. And one of the things that we had to do at the very beginning of starting up Four Directions was to address the lack of legal infrastructure at the time to provide the necessary legal recourse that we would need in the event of any kind of foreclosure or default. And so we worked very closely with the tribes in setting up MOUs and trustee agreements to enable us to lend in their community. We also help to ensure that there is a flow of capital into the communities. So often traditional lenders aren't able to bring their capital, their loan capital, directly into the Native communities. And so through Native CDFIs, they in turn lend to us, and then we re-lend out into the Native community. And so it allows that capital to flow into the communities and help build assets and wealth with our tribal members. And then lastly, another important role that CDFIs play is in the technical assistance regarding housing development, community and economic development, and helps to allow for informed decision-making at the tribal level. And then lastly, I just wanted to show some of our programming and what our capabilities are in terms of assisting the tribes in affordable home ownership. And we have created some great, strong strategic partnerships with the Wabanaki leadership, the chief and councils. We work very closely with the Wabanaki departments, the housing department and their economic development departments, as well as their health and human services. And we also partner very closely with other main CDFIs and regional economic development corporations and national nonprofits and foundations. These partnerships are all very key to ensuring that we can do our job in providing affordable home ownership in our communities. So some of the lending products that we do provide are home mortgages on and off the reservation. We serve the entire state of Maine, but the bulk of our mortgage lending does occur on the reservations. We have a home improvement and energy efficient upgrade loan, as well as a home equity and debt consolidation loan and refinancing. And we couple that with our financial capabilities training. We provide free financial counseling with regard to credit, budget savings, and home ownership. We also work with the entrepreneur and artisans in terms of artisan support and business technical assistance. And as I mentioned, our volunteer income tax assistance, and then the community outreach that we do with our circuit rider. And our more recent program, the Community Development Lending and Technical Assistance Program, we work within the tribes to provide loans, construction loans, gap financing. We also do lines of credit and working capital for any pre-development work with the tribes. And we've assisted as a co-developer on some of the construction projects for housing and community facilities. Just recently participating with the Penobscot Nation on a 24 elder housing unit that just was completed at the end of December, and we now have, we've been able to fill those 12 of those 24 elder housing units, so we're really happy with that. And then we also assist the tribes, as I mentioned, in adopting lending laws. We're working with the Maliseets and hopefully also soon with the Aroostook Band and Mi'kmaq Indians, and then just some of the housing needs assessments that the tribes may want us to assist them with. So that's sort of a quick summary of what we do, Native CDFIs in Indian country, to address affordable housing. And certainly we'll entertain any questions when the time is appropriate. So thank you. Waliwani.
Susan, this is Patrice. I recall, if you can hear me, that Four Directions actually offered 30-year mortgages. Is that still the case? I think you're one of the only Native CDFIs that actually has extended this kind of mortgage product.
That's right, Patrice. We from day one we began offering 30-year fixed interest rate mortgages to our tribal members, and we're continuing to do that.
And that's really important as we talk about affordability, right? Because of the length of the loan and the terms of repayment, also part of affording and making the avoiding that house burden threshold.
That's correct. And what we also do is we flip the business model in terms of housing lending. We actually provide a lower interest rate to those that are lower income and making sure that it is affordable for them versus a lot of your traditional lenders might look at their risk and provide a higher rate for those that are higher risk, and often it's going to be your lower income families that are might be deemed higher risk, and so they're often challenged with getting a higher interest rate, but we flip that.
And I think another aspect to highlight from your program is that when you talk about risk, outside lenders often look at tribal legal systems as different, unique, very complicated, and would actually perhaps increase the interest rate or the fees or what have you, because they feel just the perception of risk raises the cost of lending for Native people. Whereas, as you've said, you help tribes create mortgage laws and lending laws, so to eliminate or reduce that risk, which I think is also quite an important factor in overall affordability, both on the reservation and off the reservation. So you've done a real service to our Native people.
And I actually forgot to mention another area that we help to reduce the cost and make it more affordable is we keep our closing costs very low, and often our fees are very low, much lower than what the traditional lender is offering, and we also never require mortgage insurance, and we have a higher loan to value. We will lend up to 95% loan to value, but don't require mortgage insurance, where conventional lenders, if the loan to value of the home is greater than 80%, they will require mortgage insurance, which adds to the cost of the monthly payment.
Thank you very much for taking time for us. We have a question in the question box. Very popular. We have a lot of questions coming in now. This question is for both of you. How do you address long-term quality of housing over short-term needs of financing for the community?
That is such an excellent question, because when we talk about affordable, and I mentioned materials, contract or construction labor, but materials are a big part of the cost as well. And Susan Hammond showed a photo of a unit in her 12-unit community. We absolutely need quality. We need safe, quality homes, obviously, for our families. And there's a variety of ways to look at that. One big area that's sort of exploding in terms of this question of cost and quality is manufactured housing or factory-built housing. And that in itself is a fairly interesting undertaking in Indian country, and it is an important factor in affordable home ownership option. We have found several communities that have built or constructed neighborhood, dozens of homes around that model of factory built, and they can assure quality and efficiency. They can do energy efficiency as well. The big factor, of course, is transportation. But when we look at the cost of financing manufactured housing, is where we see the balance, the cost factor being really out of balance. The Center for Indian Country Development did some recent research on the cost of financing in Indian country, and I think Susan Hammond can speak to this as well. Manufactured housing, or at least the old way of thinking of manufactured housing, is higher cost in terms of financing. So it certainly sort of pencils out to be more cost effective if you can get all the pieces aligned just right in terms of design and transportation and so forth. And then the financing piece at the end, I think, needs to be factored in with all the issues that we've talked previously in terms of a community infrastructure that supports lending overall. Susan, what would you say?
Well, when we work with the tribes, and certainly around housing development and looking at the quality of the homes that are being built, energy efficiency is just a critical component for us, and we always make sure that we include that in the design of the home as well as quality materials. And I think one of the ways that we help to address the affordability, the cost of providing quality homes as well as the affordable financing piece is just looking for those various subsidies to help bring down the cost of the overall cost of the home when the homeowner has to go and finance the home. And the financing also addresses helping to create specific terms that will keep the home affordable, maybe extending the term actually from 30 to 35, maybe doing a sliding scale rate based upon their income for the first 5 years, and then locking in an interest rate for the remaining 30 years, just to ensure that there is affordability. And with regard to manufactured homes, and we do see a number of tribal members wanting to purchase new manufactured homes, we don't discriminate in terms of our interest rate charged. We have the same interest rate across the board, whether it's a manufactured home or a stick-built home, and trying to make, again, manufactured homes affordable for people.
Thank you. This next question is for Patrice. We have a question about, is there a resource or are you able to share housing needs assessment questions? And I was wondering if you would be willing to take a moment to speak on Chapter 4, Assessing Tribal Members' Needs from the Homeownership Handbook.
Yes, I was just going to mention that. And a needs assessment is really where things start in the community, because when we see the demographics of Indian country, and this I think is true everywhere in the country, we see a very strong growth in the young population. So the most Indian country has the fastest growing population of all populations in the United States. It has a really blossoming youth population that's like under 18. And then we have a very critical elder population. And so it's important every community needs to understand the demographics. What is the community membership? What are their ages? What is their sort of living situation? So that's where the housing needs start, is who do we have in our community, and also who do we want to bring into our community. As I mentioned earlier, a young family looking for housing may have to move away from the community, reservation community, to find that housing. So you want to think beyond the current community and look at the growth rates and as well as the need rates. So as we look at Chapter 4, Assessing Tribal Members' Needs, we've actually included a model survey in the handbook. It's in the appendix, and it starts on page 150, or it's in that range. And then it's available online, but you're really asking how many bedrooms, how many bathrooms, do you need wheelchair accessibility, two-story. Oftentimes you see housing built in Indian country without a garage, without any support for things like tornadoes or wind that we experience in Oklahoma and the Dakotas. When I was at Rural Development, Alaska had the highest heating costs, so energy efficiency is phenomenally important. So you may, you're sort of like looking into a crystal ball and trying to imagine what the community could look like in 5-10 years, and then trying to match and map that community to the housing development. It's very engaging work. It's like a census type of project. There have been some really fantastic needs assessment projects in the Indian country, but they've been so revealing and illuminating of the community well beyond housing as well.
Thank you, Patrice. This next question is for you, Susan. Patrice, in her response, mentioned heating costs. We have a question on the line. If a citizen has already obtained a low-income home loan, can they refinance to weatherize their homes? And if so, how does that work if they need their homes in the 30-year loan?
Yes, they can. We do actually have a refinance home loan, a product, as well as an energy efficient loan product. And we often combine the two. So if a tribal member has purchased a home, entered into a 30-year fixed loan, but discovered that they need some home improvements and certainly some ways to make their home more energy efficient, they can come back to Four Directions and we can either provide them another loan, a second mortgage on their home to provide those improvements, those energy efficient improvements, or we could refinance it to one loan and incorporate those home improvements into the loan, whichever works out best for the homeowner. In terms of the energy efficient piece, though, we offer a 0.5 percentage point discount for those who make energy efficient improvements to their home. And typically we will have an energy audit once they've completed their home, just to ensure that the improvements that they made were energy efficient. And if there's any areas that need improvement in terms of the energy audit, energy efficient audit, we will ask them to make those as well. But we will give them a 5% discount in order to incorporate energy efficiency features into their home.
That's fantastic. I know that USDA Rural Development also has some energy efficiency grants to add insulation or to reduce energy costs. For Alaska, for example, the home design went to wood pellet burning stoves, which saved, 24 cents on the dollar, which was pretty incredible for Alaska. So do think about looking to USDA Rural Development, and HUD, I think, also has some of those types of grants, for individual homeowners.
Right, and other energy efficient features would be improving the insulation or new windows and doors and siding. So those are all the other elements in addition to a different type of heating unit that is energy efficient, or maybe even energy efficient appliances like your refrigerator and washing machine, those kinds of appliances that would be deemed energy efficient. But we do have a working relationship with the CAP agencies here who do perform the energy audits for free for us. And there are some elements, those that are low income, they also will help them in terms of performing some energy improvements on their home for free as well.
Thank you. We have a follow-up from that response. The grant through rural development, is that through the community programs? Can you describe a little bit about that grant opportunity at rural development?
Yeah, so rural development has a rural housing service as well as the rural utility service, and between these two agencies, if you will, they have an array of fantastic grant programs. And the energy efficiency would be through RHS. They offer the direct loan and the guaranteed loan for low-income mortgages, but they also are very much involved in housing development, housing design, and supporting affordable housing in that broader way. So get a hold of your state director for rural development. Every state has a rural development office, and they can tell you about the 47 different programs they have, but a lot of their work has been on making housing more affordable, and that includes energy efficiency.
Thank you. We have one last question on the line currently, and one comment. Have either of you seen a tribal nation that has its own realtors that deal with tribal trust land process?
Yes, it's really a lot of fun when you start seeing a housing market develop in the community. We see such need and a dearth of actual property, so that when we see a for sale sign, it's really cause to celebrate. So one of the communities that I'm really familiar with is the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes in Montana. And actually, they're a community that I really learned a lot about housing development, housing financing, because very early on, the tribal council, the leadership, committed to increasing housing and home ownership for their community. And to do that, they created they established a tribal bank. And this bank was really focused on building up the credit capacity and ultimately supporting home ownership through affordable lending, like Susan has spoken about. But they also realized that they needed to create a market for homes to be purchased, homes to be resold, sort of sharing that equity, or showing that the equity that's being built up is actually adding wealth and assets to the community. So they also have a tribal land and office that handles this sort of thing. And it truly is remarkable to see the housing department involved and engaged in creating this real viable housing market, and not just in terms of creating financing opportunities, but working with the larger community to find units, to acquire units, to offer housing in a regular market. And I've seen some other communities do the same, and I think it really helps when the tribe is all in, meaning they're making housing a full priority, and they're committed from the very beginning, like the needs assessment to the development and creating this opportunity for wealth. So we have a video on sovereign lending on the Center for Indian Country Development website, but it shows in that video this market that they're building as well. A new family in a starter home, and then sort of the array of housing options that they've created.
Thank you. The last comment we have currently on the line is for those of you who may be interested in opportunities with 30-year mortgages and how those can be structured, the Tiwa Lending Services provides a 30-year mortgage for the Isleta tribal members. So to the extent you would like to explore that option, you could reach out there as well. With no more questions on the line at this time, I think I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Susan Anderson.
Great, thank you. Okay, great. Well, Good afternoon, everyone. This is Susan Anderson with Enterprise Community Partners, and it's an honor to be here today to share with you some of our work that has progressed out of our partnership with CICD and the Tribal Leaders Handbook on Home Ownership. I like to think of this as the next step. And so over the last year, we have been developing a companion curriculum to that manual, and want to say thank you to CICD as well as NeighborWorks America for their partnership and support in testing and vetting this curriculum with housing practitioners. And we are rolling this final curriculum out over the next year or two. In fact, we have one coming up at the end of next month in partnership with the New Mexico Tribal Homeownership Coalition and TIWA Lending, as well as Native Capital Access and New Mexico MFA. And this is a 3.5-day training, really targeting TDHEs, tribal housing authorities, tribal housing departments, and Native CDFIs to build their capacity around their home ownership programs as they work to create home ownership opportunities in the communities they serve. However, it's nice to be able to access these resources even if you're not able to attend a 3-day training. And so what you're seeing right now is our newly launched website featuring components of this curriculum. You can just go to Native Home Ownership at enterprisecommunity.org. And here's the front page of the website, and you can navigate through all the modules of the curriculum. So let's just go to assessing tribal members' needs, because I know that was a question someone had asked about. And so it kind of walks you through a little bit of what you might see and get at the 3-day training, and you can walk yourself through it as a participant. So you can say, it's just me, I want to work through this workbook on my own. Or, if you're interested in leading a group, you can click here and request permission or access to do that. Or if you're returning through the use of cookies, it'll take you back to where you were. So you can walk through the curriculum. And again, this is information that's in the curriculum, tips for conducting a successful needs assessment. We saw a sample, a needs assessment by Big Water Consulting, both in the Tribal Leaders Handbook on Homeownership and within the curriculum itself. So you can kind of walk through the curriculum and keep your answers if you want to actually go through the curriculum yourself. And then you can always navigate through modules if you want to go on to the next module. Again, even working through this on your own. And then if you're interested in upcoming trainings, you can click on that, and here it is on Enterprise's website, the upcoming training with the New Mexico Tribal Homeownership Coalition. So that's just a quick preview of this website and the curriculum that's newly launched. So happy to leave it there, and if anyone has questions about the curriculum or the website. Otherwise, thanks for your time today.
All right, give it a moment to see if any items come up in the question box. All right. Hearing none, thank you all very much, both to our presenters and our attendees for joining us for this webinar series. For a quick announcement, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency and the Federal Insurance Deposit Corporation released their much anticipated proposed rule to modernize the Community Reinvestment Act, a regulatory framework that features landmark provisions designed to incentivize increased access to capital and credit for tribal governments, communities, and citizens. The comment deadline is March 9th, 2020. NCAI is supportive of this proposed rule and will be circulating a form letter of support for your consideration in the coming days. Copies of the Tribal Leaders Handbook on Homeownership can be downloaded for free from CICD's website at the address on your screen. As previously mentioned, this webinar will be posted on NCAI's YouTube channel. Once the webinar is posted, an email will be sent to all the webinar registrants that will include links to directly download the handbook from CICD's website, and will also include information for Enterprise Community Development's products as well. Additionally, past and future information regarding this 4-part webinar series will be included for your ease of use in those communications. Thank you again for joining us for this 4-part series on the Tribal Leaders Handbook on Homeownership, and please do not hesitate to reach out at any time with any questions or comments that you may have. Thank you very much.